Guys, we're friends, right? Well, the sign of a true friend is when they discover something good, they share it with you. And that's what I'm gonna do today. This is Loretta's British ginger tea. It is amazing. It's got 100% ginger, cinnamon, elderberry, and manuka honey. Gotta admit, don't know what manuka honey is, not even sure what it does for you, but it just sounds healthy, so I need some. This tea is fantastic for boosting your immune system, helps you feel good, and you'll live out loud like our beautiful British friend Loretta. Please hit her up on Instagram, order some of this tea, and she is at farmers markets and pop-up shops everywhere. You gotta get some of this stuff. Not only is it good for you, but it tastes great. Loretta's British ginger tea. I got some, you need it too. Go and order now.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Bob Lee from 107.5 WBLS and the Make the Grade Foundation for Education. You're listening to Rudy Radio.
The views and opinions expressed during this program are entirely those of the show's hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of Rude Rangers Entertainment, its investors, management, advertisers, or staff.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Acupuncture is My Life. Now, in this episode, I plan to talk about both the functions of the bladder as a yang organ and its potential accompanying patterns or disharmonies. Okay. And again, I've said this a few times, it's best that you learn as much as possible or get to understand as much as possible as to how an acupuncturist perceives the functions of the bladder, so that as I discuss different types of diseases, how it's diagnosed by an acupuncturist, you'd have a full understanding. Because again, the core of disharmony within the human body is relative to an imbalance of yin and yang. And I say this over and over because when yin and yang is out of balance, the human body cannot regulate itself. And I mean, the human body is just an awesome, I'll use machine. It's an awesome machine. I mean, it self-repairs, it adjusts to external variants such as changes in climate, many things. I mean, it's awesome. And we've grown to underappreciate that fact. But again, I discussed the different functions of different yin and yang organs so that when discussing diseases, you can get a better understanding as to how this disharmony presents relative to yin and yang, and how an acupuncturist focuses on the body's energy in the form of qi to reestablish balance so that the body can regulate itself. But before discussing the functions of the bladder, I need you to momentarily attempt to block your understanding of the Western concept of the internal organs completely, okay? Ready? Okay. Now, an acupuncturist understands the bladder as to having only one main function, which is removing water by qi transformation. Now, I know many of you are like, what? Well, to an acupuncturist, the bladder does a little more than what is considered done from a Western medicine concept. To an acupuncturist, The bladder stores, it excretes urine, as well as it plays a part in the transformation process of fluids that are required for the production of urine. Now, if any of you guys have ever watched the Acupuncture is My Life YouTube channel and viewed the different videos on the functions of the internal organs, you would see in the video that we've done, the Acupuncture is My Life clinic has done on the functions of the small intestine. The small intestine is responsible for sending clear fluids, in which is separated from dirty fluids, to the bladder to be transformed and excreted as urine. Now, this function cannot be performed without energy derived from the kidney. And in the video on the Acupuncture is My Life YouTube channel, I discuss how the kidney is the foundation of all yin energies throughout the body. Now, as well as yang. You have the kidney yin aspect and the kidney yang aspect. And the bladder is a yang organ. It's considered a yang organ. Acupuncture is my life. And it needs assistance from the kidney to transform and excrete urine. Now, the bladder also needs assistance from other organs as well to control urination, such as the small intestine, in which I just stated, but also the liver via the free flow of liver qi to ensure smooth urination. And I spoke of that, the functions of the liver episode in past shows, as well as on the Acupuncture is My Life YouTube channel. The liver, one of its main functions is ensuring the smooth flow of qi throughout the entire body. And liver qi runs through the bladder, just as it runs through all other organs, whether it's a yin organ or a yang organ. Now, when liver qi stagnates, a myriad of problems can occur. While discussing how liver qi ensures a smooth flow of urination, when liver qi stagnates, it can lead to urinary dysfunction. Now, guess what? As I stated, other organs are involved as well. The lungs also assist the bladder in its function by way of the dissension of lung qi. Because lung qi goes down, and it usually goes to the kidneys, which is the paired organ, the paired yin organ, to the bladder, which is the yang organ. Now, this dissension of lung qi also empowers the bladder to perform its function. Now, the lungs are also responsible for dispersing and descending qi. And when it comes to assisting the bladder, the descending of the lung qi to the kidneys helps with the process of transforming fluids as well as the excretion of urine. Please remember that. Please remember that. And whenever someone is having bladder issues, and in future episodes I'm discussing diseases or disorders that involve the bladder, you must remember the main function of the bladder is qi transformation, which is basically transforming and excreting fluids via the power of qi. You see, the bladder receives its qi in order to function from the kidneys. Please keep that in mind. All right? Because physiologically, to an acupuncturist, the bladder is directly connected to the small intestine, whereas it receives, as I stated, the dirty part of the fluids after separation into a dirty and a clean part. Okay? So when it comes to certain patterns, certain problems, disharmonies, in which the bladder can face, general causes of those problems is, one can be exterior pathogenic factors, in which climate plays a big role, or it affects the bladder in this aspect. You see, let's say like excessive exposure to cold, or that damp type of weather that you can face at within a certain season, or you have different countries where it's just damp year round. But exposure to cold and damp weather, or sitting on, let's say, a damp surface, such as poolside, or on the wet sand on the beach for an extended period of time, or even living in damp places. Let's say you live in the basement, in a climate where it can be moist, damp, or it can rain a lot or enough. These are contributing factors that lead to the accumulation of dampness in the bladder. Whereas you can be diagnosed as having either damp cold or damp heat. And damp heat can derive from exterior cold. So exposure to damp heat, let's say in a tropical country, can directly lead to damp heat in the bladder. So that's how an exterior pathogenic factor can affect the bladder, leading to some type of dampness, whether cold or heat. The next can be another cause of bladder disharmony, can be due to emotional strain. Now, I'm sure many of you adults have seen this when it comes to children, especially. Now, as I stated in the Acupuncture is My Life channel on the video on the functions of the kidneys are affected by fear. Fear has a direct relationship with the kidneys. And fear negatively impacts the kidneys. And too much of it creates kidney disorders. But now keep in mind, I said the bladder is the young organ that's related to the kidneys, which is a yin organ. The same holds true for the bladder as well. So when it comes to, let's say, children, fear, a feeling of insecurity, or being anxious, can lead to a sinking of chi in the bladder, resulting in why children wet the bed sometimes. And many adults are unaware of that. And this is why, I cover not only the functions of particular organs, but their disharmonies as well. So when your child is wetting the bed and you're getting upset and you can't seem to figure out why, maybe think of what could my child be afraid of, or why is my child over anxious, or what type of insecurity is my child facing. And many parents have brought their children into the Acupuncture is My Life clinic here in New York City and other clinics globally, because I've spoken of this with my colleagues, presenting with issues of sinking chi in the bladder. And parents are amazed as to how acupuncture can help with that. Which is why I recommend, seeing acupuncturists. Include acupuncture as part of your health regimen, along with your annual visits with your physician. And a lot of health issues, the weight of it, the burden of it will quickly be lifted from your shoulders. Now back to emotional strain. Now that's how, emotional strain affects the bladder when it comes to children. Now adults, bladder disharmonies are often seen relative to long-term suspicion and jealousy. Jealousy when it comes to a mate or partner. Suspicion is pretty broad. What are you suspicious of pertaining to a relationship, whether it be with your boss or a coworker or your mate, sibling? I mean, suspicion goes a long way. Covers a wide gamut. But suspicion and jealousy, usually from an emotional perspective, tend to affect the bladder negatively. Now the next may surprise many of you is another cause for bladder disharmony or bladder patterns is excessive sexual activity. Too much of anything is no good. But in this case, too much sexual activity tends to deplete kidney yang. And kidney yang deficiency, in an indirect manner, affects the bladder, because the bladder derives its energy from kidney yang. So now think about it. If you're depleting kidney yang, where else is the bladder going to get its energy from to perform its function? So with a deficient kidney yang affecting the bladder, whereas it's not deriving the appropriate amount of energy to perform its functions, usually results, and if you ever experience abundant urination or nocturia or incontinence, it can be due to kidney yang deficiency. And excessive sexual activity tends to affect men more than it does women. Also, having sex too early, and this is both boys and girls. Engaging in sexual activity at a super young age can injure a person's penetrating and directing vessels. Which is your Chong meridian and your Ren Mai meridian. And I'll get into those in the future. But when those are affected, it can cause urinary problems later in life. Now, when I say too early when it comes to sexual activity, I'm talking about somewhere in the time of either before or during puberty. Another cause for bladder disharmony can be due to exercising too much. Again, too much of anything is no good. Exercising too much, especially lifting heavy weights, can weaken the bladder and kidney yang, which can then lead to issues such as bladder deficient cold. And I'll discuss the symptoms of that in a sec. But just like any other internal organ to an acupuncturist, it has full patterns and it has empty patterns. But one, let's say, as I spoken of earlier, damp heat in the bladder. That can be a pattern. where if you're ever experiencing frequent and urgent urination and it burns, or you have difficulty urinating, or you stop in the middle of your urinary flow, well, you stop in the middle of your flow and the urine is dark yellow, or it's dirty, and it can even be blood. You can experience a fever and hypogastric fullness and pain, a feeling of heat. That's damp heat in the bladder. Those are symptoms. Like Batoon acupuncturists, dark urine, difficult urination, burning urination are enough for an acupuncturist to diagnose damp heat in the bladder. Now, what can cause this? As I previously stated, it can be caused by excessive exposure to dampness and cold. Because both cold and dampness tend to penetrate the bladder from below and lead to dampness in the bladder, which eventually turns into damp heat. So I want you to understand that. I want you to understand that exterior cold dampness can evolve to a pattern of damp heat in the bladder. Now, the effects that any exterior pathogenic factor can have on a person, it all depends on that person's constitution. Because I say over and over when it comes to acupuncture, everyone's constitution is different. Everyone. We're all born with unique deficiencies, unique excesses. And in this case, a person can have a yang constitution as opposed to a yin constitution. And a person with a yang constitution, exterior dampness usually precedes damp heat. But damp heat is also common in most countries, even cold ones. Another cause for damp heat in the bladder can be emotional strain. Spoke of that from an adult perspective. Excess suspicion and jealousy that you've been holding in for like a long period of time can affect the bladder and create damp heat in the bladder. Let's say a case such as that. If someone was presenting with those symptoms, of a general treatment protocol can be, let's say, but of course, keep in mind, I have to see the patient. I'm just speaking in general. Damp heat in the bladder, an acupuncturist may look to resolve the dampness, clear up the heat, and open up water passages to treat that issue. Then you can have damp cold in the bladder, where the symptoms will present as urgent and frequent urination. Yeah, there'll be difficult urination where you're stopping midstream. And there'll be a feeling of, let's say, heaviness in the urethra. But in this case, your urine wouldn't be yellow or dark yellow, to be pale and dirty. And what can cause damp cold in the bladder can be excessive exposure to exterior dampness and cold. Whereas if I was presented with a case such as this, in general, I'm speaking in general terms, I would look to resolve dampness, expel the cold from the body, especially the bladder, and remove any obstruction in the lower jiao, in the water passages of the lower jiao. That's what I can look to do. And as I stated earlier, there are full patterns, but then as I do with all internal organs, I'll present some empty patterns as well. Everything, keep in mind, everything comes down to yin and yang. Where there's full, there's empty. Where there's excess, there's deficiency. It's about balance. When you're listening to Acupuncture is My Life episodes, I want you to take a look at the Acupuncture is My Life logo. Think about the balance that exists within that yin and yang symbol. Everything is about balance. How do you extract from excess to nourish deficiency? I mean, there's many ways, many approaches to healing a patient. And you know, the cool thing about acupuncture is there's no script before an acupuncture. We have our ways in which we treat patients differently. So there have been patients that have come to the Acupuncture is My Life clinic here in New York City and say, well, I got this type of treatment from the last acupuncturist that I visited. Well, okay, I'm not the last acupuncturist you visited. And I don't mean that. I'm not sounding like negative in any way, condescending, whatever. But acupuncturists approach disorders from different angles. That's what's awesome about us. There's no script to how we treat patients. But when it comes to, let's say, an empty pattern, I'll just give you one example. One can be like bladder deficiency or deficient cold in the bladder, or bladder deficient and cold, where your urination would present is abundant, of course, and it'll be pale, and there'll be some incontinence and enuresis. But now in this case, you'll experience lower back pain. Now, this lower back pain can stem, and this is why I said I speak in general terms, because I would have to see the patient. I would have to diagnose the patient. This lower back pain can stem from kidney yang deficiency. Remember I stated earlier, the bladder gets its energies from kidney yang. And when kidney yang is deficient, a symptom of kidney yang deficient is lower back pain. And it can be some dizziness, nocturia, and white urethral discharge, and you would also feel cold as well. Now, causes of bladder deficiency and cold can be due to excessive sexual activity, especially in men, because in men, excess sexual activity weakens kidney yang. Remember I said that? Now, when it comes to both men, women, boys, girls, this can be a problem as a result of having had sex too early in life, either before or during puberty. Another cause of bladder deficient and cold can be due to exterior pathogenic factors. Constantly being exposed to cold or living in a damp, cold environment. Now, in this case, women are more susceptible to being affected by cold in the lower jowl, especially during menstruation. The uterus is susceptible to cold during menstruation, childbirth, and puberty. So women really have to be careful during those times. And also, again, physical exercise, not activity, but exercise, lifting heavy weights can cause a person's bladder to become deficient and cold. And as an acupuncturist in a case like that, just in general terms, there would be a focus toward tonifying and warming the bladder as well as kidney yang. But if I ever come across a case close to this, like just seeing or noticing frequent pale urination, and the patient can present with a deep, weak pulse, especially in the chirp position, that would be enough for me to diagnose bladder deficient and cold. Now, pulse diagnosis, that I'm going to recommend you see your local acupuncturist. They'll explain that to you. There's so much an acupuncturist can get from pulse diagnosis. But you have to understand, seeing an acupuncturist for regular wellness visits, it doesn't have to be every week. Severe cases, maybe let's just throw it out there, autoimmune disorders, chronic, you may see your acupuncturist twice a week for a period of time. Not for the rest of your life though, no. But it varies. You could see him or her every other week, once a month, once every 6 weeks. And I have patients that with seasonal change, I see them. But I'll tell you this, just like I tell them, you must make acupuncture a part of your life. Because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?